Imagine leaving America for 14 years, coming back, and seeing the divide hit you like a punch. That's what happened to Brad Porteus, and he was mad. So he built bridgegrades.org, a new way to spot which politicians actually collaborate instead of perform. If you're tired of feeling powerless in a boiling culture, stick around. This is how we take our agency back. Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. I'm your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. The Derate the Hate podcast is proudly produced in collaboration with Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots, cross-partisan organization working towards civic renewal. This podcast amplifies the mission that we share to foster a more respectful and united America where civic friendship thrives even when we disagree. Each week, through the power of story, conversation, and connection with incredible guests, we work to build bridges instead of barriers. Not to change minds on the issues, but to change how we see one another when we differ. Because, friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share it with a friend, and visit braverangels.org to learn how you can get involved in the movement to bridge the partisan divide. Friends, I am so incredibly grateful that you have joined me for another powerful Derate the Hate episode. So let's get to it. My guest today is a man who saw the division with the stark, fresh eyes of a returning expatriate. Brad Porteus spent 14 years living and working abroad in Singapore and Amsterdam, leading big consumer technology companies. When he returned to the U.S. in 2024, he wasn't just disturbed, he was alarmed, even mad, by the toxic political polarization and the headwind it's creating for our country. He noticed something that we, who live here every day, have become numb to. How easily we've self-sorted into the red team and the blue team, letting our political identity become our core identity. We are all caught in the outrage economy, where people from big tech to media to politicians are profiting by convincing us that we are more divided than we actually are. That feeling of powerlessness, that feeling of hopelessness, Brad says that is precisely the trap that we must stop falling into. His answer is bridgegrades.org. It's a data-driven system to look past the rhetoric and grade our legislators on what they do, their collaboration and bridging over division. This isn't about giving up your values. It's about embracing pluralism and finding the win-wins. This conversation is the on-ramp that we need to restore our agency and heal the civic fabric of our nation. Let's get into it with my friend Brad Porteus. Here we go. Brad Porteus, welcome to the Derate the Hate podcast, my friend. So good to see you again.
Hey, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the DTH listeners, I want to just throw out there right away, I got to meet Brad at a Bridging Coalition summit a little while back out in Mount Vernon. We were there for a Bridging Coalition summit, and Brad came up to me and talked to me a little bit about the Bridge Grades project that he's working on, and bridgegrades.org. And I got to hear a little bit about his story, and I wanted to bring it to the DTH listeners because not only obviously being in the bridging space, anytime I hear something about, bridge building or people trying to better the world in one way or another, I get pretty excited. I like to bring those stories to the DTH listeners. So Brad, let's start with I want to know more about your story, because looking at your past, looking at what led you to the bridging space, you spent several years overseas working for a variety of companies, I guess, and doing different things, and then you come back to the States in 2024. So let's start there, because you said something that really stood out to me, and that's you said that you were disturbed, that you were troubled by a number of the different things, polarization wise, when you got back to the States. So
Yeah, I might have even said I was mad.
maybe you
But
did, yeah.
I do remember. I do remember the moment I met you because you're a pretty distinctive guy, and you're on my list of people to meet. But then you and I were walking around Mount Vernon, and I was talking to somebody else, and I think I made the comment that I was hoping I'd be good in this life and get reincarnated as a Labrador Retriever, and then you chuckled, and I think that's how it all started.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, look, I'm a guy who fell into this work like I think a lot of other people are, and it sort of found me in some ways. To your point, I had basically returned to the US after living abroad for 14 years. So I moved to Asia. I lived in Singapore for 7 years. And then work took me to Amsterdam. And I was there another 7 years. And then I returned back to the US. And I had kids with me and family. My wife and I did this. And it was a situation where I was returning back in 2024 after being abroad this whole time. And I was like nervous. I was like scared what I was going to find. I'd been back to visit, of course, but
Yeah.
it's just different when I was coming to come back and immerse myself back into my neighborhood and everything else. And to be honest, I was really worried about it. And it was causing me to think about, well, maybe this is something that maybe I should lean into and try to learn more about it. And one thing led to another, and I can tell you all about that. But that's how it all started.
Yeah, so I definitely want to get into that, because when people live overseas, well, a lot of times people that I've found here in the States that are constantly in it, like many things, right? When that's what our reality is, that's what our lived experience is, we don't quite notice it so much. But when you leave in 2010, come back in 2024, you're gone for 14 years. There's definitely a shift in the Overton window, I guess, in so many ways here in the United States, and polarization has certainly become one of those things that has shifted. Toxic polarity, whether it be societal divides, political divides, just the civic fabric of our nation in many ways feels torn. And I think a lot of people, Brad, that are constantly here may not see it, because it happens. It's not like it happens overnight. It happens incrementally over time.
Yeah, that's a great point, Wilk. I guess what comes up for me is the boiling frog analogy, where you put a frog in a pot of water and you gradually heat it up, and supposedly it won't jump out because it doesn't realize that it's getting too hot for itself. And I think in some ways, when you're in it, like you're describing, in terms of living here in the US and you're here day to day, you incrementally don't notice the difference. But when you step away and come back, then the difference is very stark. And to your point, it's not just the polarization. There's lots of other things as well. But it's amazing how many of the topics come back to the topic of polarization. And what's striking, I think, is the identity politics and the way that people so naturally have self-sorted into the red team and the blue team. And it was just sort of amazing to see. I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up in the 70s and so forth. And so I'm old enough to remember that there was a time when there was an ideological overlap between the parties. And that was then an environment where, first of all, people didn't identify so clearly as one or the other. I mean, my dad was a Republican, my mom's a Democrat, and their families came from these different parties, but it never really was an issue at all. And that was normal. And nowadays it's like, that's pretty unusual. So I'm used to and aware of the fact that it can be different. So for people who are younger, it's like, oh, well, this must be like the way it always is and always will be. But that hasn't always been the case.
No.
And I think there's a lot of reasons why it's the case. And there's been a ton of diagnoses. I'm sure you and your listeners have been talking about these topics for a long time in terms of those diagnoses. But I got to the point where I was like, well, maybe we can do something about it. And actually, one of the things we can talk more about the discrepancy of what I left and what I came back to. But I think one of the things that I was really struck by was how distraught everybody felt about the fact that, oh, there's nothing we can do about it. So we're polarized, but gosh, there's nothing we can do about it. And this sort of feeling of hopelessness. And I thought to myself, hey, wait a minute, we're Americans, man. There's always a way. Like, we can always try something new. Like, where's that spirit? Like, I felt like it was just sort of missing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there, Will, because you guys are doing it, Braver Angels, and it's there, but it's not visible.
Right. And it's that loss of agency that we really are working, especially at Braver Angels, that loss of agency that so many people feel today, that we're working so hard to help renew for people, through courageous citizenship, through courageous dialogue. That is one of the most important things, because you have a powerlessness and you have a hopelessness, right? And when people feel powerless, they get angry, or
that's a great
and
point.
People feel hopeless, they get depressed. Well, there's a whole bunch of things that come along with both hopelessness and feeling depressed, and that lack of agency, that powerlessness, because then people get angry, and you combine that with the ugliness of polarization. And you said something really great there, Brad, about self-segregating, and how back in the 70s, and I grew up in the 70s and the 80s as well, and there wasn't this thing, I mean, maybe for some people, but it was probably much more anecdotal than it is today, where people's political identity was not part of their core identity like it is today. Right? The identity politics and the self-segregating and the siloing. Well, when we start to self-segregate and silo, we end up in this situation where we lose sight of who people really are. And when we lose sight of who they are, like Monica Guzman says, those who are underrepresented in our life will be overrepresented in our minds and imaginations. And then I continue on that statement to say that those things that we are imagining are not the best of those that we're segregating ourselves from.
Yeah.
We
use and the data backs that up. All the research and everything else, right? We ascribe better intentions to people who we identify with, and we ascribe worse intentions to the people we don't identify with, and then you do the actual research in the data itself, and it's like doesn't connect at all. So
it does not connect. It's just such an ugly thing, because then that separation makes us hate those we have siloed ourselves from. Once we start to hate them, we imagine them as being worse. The effective polarization takes over. And then that powerlessness and hopelessness that we feel makes people do all sorts of ugly things. So we take this, to the next level of political violence. Political violence is there's definitely a causal link between that powerlessness, that lack of agency, that hopelessness, that depression that comes along with that, and then the hate that they have for people that they don't understand. That's why it's so important that we find the way to bridge those divides. We find a way to have those courageous conversations across divides.
And I think what you bring up a bunch of things that I'm tempted to react to, but I think one of them is that the fog economy makes it so that the outrage economy is such that people are profiting from this. So it's easy for us to think that we are so far divided that it's beyond hope. But actually, the reality is that there's the bell curve is a lot stronger than people actually think it is. Mm-hmm. But the deck is stacked against us as citizens, because big tech and algorithms and politicians are all getting rich, and influencers are all getting rich by convincing us, and media, I mean, all of them, everybody's making money dividing us. And so I think once people begin to realize that we're sort of pawns in a bigger game, and that it's a bit of a trap, and they want us to believe that we're more divided than we are, then we're falling into that trap. And a lot of times I like to say, like, we have to figure out a way to stop taking the bait. I mean, we're being baited. We're being baited into this rage, and that cycle that you just described, because people are profiting. They're making money off of it. And yeah, some of it is authentic, but humans are not that different than they were when you and I were growing up. I mean, it's not that we're fundamentally different species or we're different people. It's just that we've been tricked into behaving in a way that is unhealthy.
Yeah, and I said it earlier, that Overton window, right? What we get used to now becomes the norm. Perception becomes reality. One of the things that I've been talking a lot about lately, Brad, is the idea that perception for us as human beings, perception is reality quite often, and our perception of things is strongly guided by what we consume. It's strongly guided by the media that we watch, the media that we listen to, the people that we follow on social media, the politicians that we begin to prop up as these idealistic figures, things like that. So if what we're consuming is the strongest guider for our perception becomes reality. Our reality is very skewed, and that window has shifted greatly in the past 10, 15 years.
And not together. I mean, the windows have been collectively shifted away from each other. So there's two windows that have been moving.
Two realities.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I think this is your 286th, 290th, 200, 300, nearing 300 podcasts that you've done, man.
Yeah. I
got to believe that by now, like there's been like a ton of unpacking about how we got here and why we're here and so forth. But I guess the one of the interesting things that maybe we can talk about is like, well, how do we get out of it? Like, what are the things that we can do to get out? And there's a bunch of stuff I think that matter, and some of it are these gigantic big structural things that are hard to do, which is why when I just said that people had given up and were hopeless and we're not trying anymore, a lot of those things are like, I don't know, maybe the way the elections are run and all these big giant structural things, but there are other things that I think as a society can do. I do think regulating social media at a certain level and somehow some sort of controls over the algorithm and the algorithms that are now basically running all of our lives is merited. And I'm not an expert on that, but I think that that's important, because when you talked about how perception is reality, our perception is only the algorithm that we're being fed. So that is a dangerous spot. But I think transparency and accountability is sort of what's on my mind, especially around what bridge grades is really all about. So the way I like to think about what bridge grades is for, it's really about trying to strengthen legislative health, the health of the legislative branch, right? So if you recognize there's three branches of government, I would characterize the moment we're in as the executive branch is claiming as much power as possible and is testing its limits on what is in its power. I think the judicial branch has been effectively supportive of that in terms of offering a green light and allowing, if not encouraging, additional executive power. And this is where our founding fathers would have said, well, hey, if they go too far, then the legislative branch needs to step in and act as a counterbalance and make things right and put those speed bumps in and guardrails in place. But the fact is that our legislative branch is actually very ineffective as a counterbalance right now to the other two branches of government. And why is that? Well, the polarization of these two chambers is so extreme that they're unable to really find each other and govern for the bulk of the people. And why are they so polarized? Well, it's the incentives, money and power ultimately is going to the people who are the most extreme. So our legislative representatives are like a U-shaped curve, and the population is more like a bell-shaped curve. I mean, it might be a double Campbell hump curve, but more people are in the middle than the representation of our legislative branch, and that's because of incentives. So the goal is to actually try to shift the incentives over a period of time, and the way we're trying to do that is by, first of all, measuring using public data to not on an ideological basis, not on a left or right basis, but we're measuring our legislators on how collaborative or divisive they are. So if you think of it like a polarization score, you earn points for collaborating with people in the other parties. So legislative record and bipartisanship comes into play in a very big way.
Okay.
And also, if you're your rhetoric, there's rhetoric analysis. All of this is done by third parties. We can get into the details of it, but loosely, it's about what you do and what you say. So the legislative record is about bipartisanship. The rhetoric analysis is about two things. Do you talk about bipartisanship? And also, do you engage in personal attacks? Not challenging policy, but actually personally attacking other people. So we pull all this data together. We create a 100-point scale. The top half of the class get A's and B's, and we call them bridgers. The bottom half of the class gets C's and F's, so we call them dividers. And the scoring is updated about every 2 or 3 months, and we'll continue to update through the course of their term as Congress people in the 119th Congress.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the rhetoric meter then, because quite often the rhetoric that we see, rhetoric has a lot to do with political theater. The rhetoric is often. I guess where I'm trying to go with this is so rhetoric is one thing, and politicians that there are obviously politicians, Brad, who spend a lot more time in front of a camera and a lot more time in front of a microphone than others. So is there a weighted scale for those who really just want to do their job? They kind of stay away from the cameras, they stay away from the microphones. And then there's the more hyperbolic ones that obviously the media outlets are searching out, right? They're seeking those that really have an affinity for whipping up people's emotions through their rhetoric. Yeah. So how does that weighted scale play into it? Because I think that's got to be an important part of how this works.
Super, super good question. I think, so we do, to your point, we do apply different weights to different data sets based on how correlated they are or how much signal they give us within the noise. We talk a lot about, with data, you talk a lot about finding the signal within the noise. And the signal we're calibrating towards is this idea of collaboration versus divisiveness. So if you look at rhetoric, and let me back up 1 second. Broadly, we sort of have the point of view, which is like 2/3 of your score should be what you do, and 1/3 should be what you say. It's about that. It's approximately, and that's because walking the walk is more important than talking the talk.
So 2/3 is what you do. 2/3 is what you do, and 1/3 is what you say.
That's right, roughly speaking, and that's subject to change. And we're going to continue to sharpen and analyze things, and nothing is set in stone. But generally speaking, it's more important what you do than what you say. But what you say matters, right? I mean, rhetoric absolutely matters in our system. So we on a rhetoric analysis perspective, we're using data that's coming from an organization called the Polarization Research Lab. It's a Dartmouth-led. There's some Penn people involved. There might be some Stanford people involved, but it's like a usual sort of academic think tank, if you will. And one of the things that they do is they use technology to scrape all of the statements coming from every congressperson. So they look at Twitter, they look at speeches, they look at press releases, everything they can get their hands on. And then what they do is they chunk it up into bite-sized sound bites, so sentences, if you will. That they run every single sentence through a set of prompts. By the way, we don't like to use a lot of AI and black box, but if someone else is doing it, then okay, but we just want to explain how it works. So in this case, they run it through a bunch of prompts. And one of them is, how often, is this comment about bipartisanship? So they're logging the number of times somebody is talking about bipartisanship. And so you earn points in our system for that. And then there's a second prompt that asks, is this a personal attack? And they have a way of determining whether somebody is being essentially going on the attack and attacking someone's person or character, as opposed to, say challenging, a policy, for example, or a belief. And you lose points for engaging in personal attacks. And then the rating system weighs these kind of inputs, but it's a relative basis, right? So in the Senate, you have 100 senators. In the House, you have 435 representatives. Your personal attacks are compared to the rest of your peer group. So do you engage more or less than your peers in personal attacks, for example? So you can imagine you have all these different columns of data where you're racked and stacked against your peers on these different dimensions, and then we sort of sum it all up. And what ends up happening is there's a pretty good distribution or differentiation between the people who are the bridgers and who are the dividers. And I think one of the most interesting things is the dividers. Like, I mean, I'm not intrinsically like a political guy, Wilk. You probably think, I mean, I'm learning because I'm now doing this work, but I didn't like, I don't know who's who. Like, I don't follow it that closely. But I knew the names of the dividers. Like, if you look at the list of people who get Fs on our system, I mean, these people are all famous.
Right. Yeah. They're the ones, like
are,
I said, they're the ones, they're constantly in front of a camera. They're constantly in front of a microphone. And the reason they're constantly in front of a camera and a microphone is because they are those that capitalize on fog. I mean,
absolutely.
And
yes.
You're right. You're right, Brad. Most people don't know the names of all those people. I mean, I'm one that often says the phrase, those who represent us are far too often not the best of us. Because, again, that perception is reality thing, right? If the people that we constantly see, and this is why Congress has such a low approval rating, but if constantly what we see are those representatives, those senators and congressmen and women that are just the deep polarizers.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. The perception that we have as being all of them.
Well, a few things. One is, you're right. They're not all of them are that way. However, the incentives are there for them to be that way. And so therefore it's self-selecting. So the people who love that kind of, polarizing leadership, if you want to call it that, are attracted to running for Congress. If you're a more thoughtful, nuanced person who can hold two different competing thoughts in your mind and understand that they may not be ideologically in tune with each other, if you're a more nuanced person like that, you have no interest in being in Congress because you're just going to get destroyed. So it's a self-selecting system. So when you talked about the phrase, the quote you just said about our best not being there, it's true, because the best people who I think would be best in representing the broadest, what I call like our deliciously eclectic society, it means you have to hold all of these different thoughts simultaneously. And yeah, I mean, the people who can do that don't want to go into the ring because they're going to get punched in the face, and that's like, it's not satisfying enough.
Yeah,
whereas,
and quite often they're getting attacked from both sides because they're not extreme enough for one side and certainly not extreme enough for the other. I do have a question, Brad, because this brings up a point that we at Braver Angels are often, people misperceive us as just wanting everybody to be in some squishy middle, right? We want everybody to just completely compromise their principles and come to the center, which is definitely not what Braver Angels is about. It's certainly not what I'm about. I mean, I've been in the depolarization business as a volunteer for several years, and now this is my full-time job. But I'm a very conservative guy. I have conservative principles. I live by those principles. But I also understand the value in being able to talk across partisan lines, right?
Oh man, I'm so glad you brought this up. I think that this is a really misunderstood part of the work that you're doing, that I'm doing, and other people who are interested in this sort of topic are doing. The way I like to think about it is, I mean, I love this word pluralism, which, I mean, it's kind of a wonky word. But the gist of it is like, comes from e pluribus unum, and that is like, one is strong from many, one. And the idea of pluralism is to say, you can be a bridger, Wilk, and you can embrace your conservative values and live your life through that lens and still be a bridger, right? Because bridging is about win-win, and dividing is about zero-sum game. So you and I don't have to agree on things to come together. We just have to find a common area of overlap. And so one of the things that I think a lot about it, and our system tries to measure, is this idea of collaboration. And it relates to your question, because the topic that I often get challenged on is, but doesn't that mean you're just rewarding people for compromising? And I said, actually, no. So this is a really important distinction to make, which is to say that to collaborate with somebody is not to compromise with them. Compromising is kind of a dirty word, because it means you're giving up something of you.
That's right.
Maybe to get a trade-off, or to get something from somebody else. So okay, that can happen. But what I'm talking about is, imagine you and I have a Venn diagram of overlap, and maybe there's a bunch of things that I'm not Christian, I'm not conservative, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a ton of things in common. And so the point of, if you and I were to collaborate on something, we find, well, what is it that we're in? Where does our Venn diagram overlap? And I promise you, if you give me two human beings on this planet from any walk of life, their Venn diagram will overlap on something.
Mm-hmm.
So, and more things than they think.
Yeah.
So the idea is, our country is amazing when we have this diverse set of people with different beliefs and ideas. One thing that to cycle back to the beginning of this conversation, one of the things that I was so struck by coming back to the US was suddenly in our country, we're trying to convince everybody else that we're right. That there's one way, or there's one answer, or there's one concept, and everyone needs to believe the same thing. Like this whole idea of quote unquote United States. I'm wearing my shirt that says States. This is the design of the coach of the U.S. men's soccer team who wore this shirt. And I thought it was like super funny because it's like, we're states. We're not exactly united, but we are states.
Yeah.
But the point is like our founding fathers, like they said 13 colonies, like, those colonies, you could live totally differently in these different colonies. And that was fine. And, no one tried to convince each other. I mean, there probably was some haranguing, but the point is like, we were all free to be how we wanted to live. And America is amazing when you bring together all of these different perspectives and you come up with the best idea and you come up with the win-win. We're failing right now because we're not finding each other and finding those win-wins. We're so busy pulling on the tug of war rope that
talking past each other instead of trying to, and that's so hugely important. It's so hugely important because, Stephen Covey talked about it in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Compromise is typically going to be either lose-lose or lose-win or win-lose. Synergy is when we come together and work together for something that's better than the sum of its parts. And the reality is, and I've had this conversation with so many people, Brad, that when it comes to talking across or having courageous conversations across political divides, it's not about always finding common ground. Sometimes we will, and that's fantastic. Like you said, everybody's going to have commonalities in their Venn diagram, and that's important. If nothing else, if we find no other common ground on a particular topic, other than the fact, Brad, that I'm a human being, you're a human being, we have our shared humanity, and we can walk away with no common ground on a particular topic, but we walk away not hating each other, at least we've got a path, or at least we've got a stepping stone to a path towards the next thing that we're going to work on together. That's it. I mean, that's really it.
Yeah, that's it. And it's not that hard to find that commonality when you're in the room face to face with people. So I do think that the more people can be around each other and with each other, the better. One of the gifts of being an American overseas is anytime you ran into another American, you instantly found like total rapport. I mean, it could be about like Halloween. It could be about whatever's happening, right?
Yeah.
There's so much commonality so instantly. And there were definitely times when we made friends very quickly, overseas. And then maybe you find out later that you have different value sets or different ideas or different backgrounds or maybe different politics. And it didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
Like, we're both in this together. I hope you guys are coming over next Saturday when we're barbecuing. Like, great. We're bringing the potato salad. Awesome.
And that's the world that we remember from when we were growing up, Brad, is
so.
Having beers in the driveway with the neighbor. We weren't talking about politics. Everything wasn't a political discussion. I know. People got together in their cul-de-sacs and did community barbecues and things like that. And politics wasn't the main topic of conversation. Political identity was not the main part of everybody's core identity. We got together because we're human beings and we love our fellow human beings. Of many one, we live in a pluralistic society. Brad, take us home as our conversation. We've run out of time.
I love that. I'll take it home just by saying, like, if I can build on what you just said, which is this unnecessary, like, sports like team, red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat, whatever it is, if we can drop that and instead unify around, let's like support bridgers and let's throw out dividers. Doesn't matter what my party is, doesn't matter what their party is. Like, if we can systematically think about the world through a vertical lens in addition to our horizontal lens, then I think we'll be better off and we'll find each other, and that win-win mentality will come back, and we'll be out of the slow lane and back into the fast lane. And that's what I'm here for.
Beautifully said, man. So the website, obviously, bridgegrades.org, right? Bridgegrades.org.
The grades are live. So if everybody who's listening is curious, just if you hit the website and do a search at the top, or you can find the tables and stuff, but just search for yours or search for your name of your state and you'll pop up, and hopefully you'll be surprised. I mean, I think I'm always surprised when I see some of the results, and it makes me think differently about them. So I encourage you to do that as well.
Yeah. So bridgegrades.org. I love what you said. Support the bridgers. Let's throw out the dividers. Let's find a way as Americans, again, to get back to the win-win, to the synergy. It's not about compromising your principles. It's about winning. It's about winning for the country. Brad Porteus, thank you so much. Bridgegrades.org. And it's been a fantastic conversation. I look forward to many more.
I loved it, and thanks for the invitation.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. We really are better together, so please take a moment to visit braverangels.org and consider joining the movement towards civic renewal and bridging our political divides. This is Wilk wrapping up for the week, saying get out there. Be kind to one another. Be grateful for everything you've got. And remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. With that, my friends, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.